Hey guys, it's the Mellowblade 5, and welcome to my response to Death Battle, Scrooge McDuck vs. Shovel Knight.
What? What the fuck?
Yeah, just to get this out of the way immediately, a big issue I have with this episode is that I personally think the matchup is really dumb. I get the connection, but it's so minor. The connection is that Shovel Knight's shovel drop attack is based on Scrooge's pogo jump from the DuckTales game. That's it! They do highlight the fact that both Scrooge and Shovel Knight are treasure hunters, but in regards to Shovel Knight, I think Death Battle severely over-exaggerates how much treasure hunting is a part of his character. Prior to the game's events, Shovel Knight and Shield Knight did hunt for treasure, but during the events of the game, treasure just acts like coins in Mario games. He doesn't actively seek it out like Scrooge does. When Scrooge McDuck was revealed at the end of Lara Croft vs. Nathan Drake, my initial reaction was, does he have any combat experience? Completely forgetting the DuckTales game. But I thought that Wario was going to be his opponent since they're both greedy characters who go on wacky adventures in search of money. Even though I personally would prefer to see Wario go up against King Dedede if he ever appears in Death Battle. So when I found out that Scrooge's opponent was Shovel Knight, it completely threw me off guard. I think that Shantae vs. Shovel Knight would have been a better matchup, since they're both iconic indie platformer characters who use very unusual weapons, and also because of the fact that Yacht Club Games is made up of people who used to work for Way Forward, so there's a bit of a rivalry between the two. But getting back on topic, when seeing the matchup, I immediately felt very passionate about Shovel Knight winning, partially due to the fact that I've played his game and even did a Let's Play of it. Hashtag shameless promotion! So I thought that if Scrooge McDuck wins, and I find issue in their reasoning, I'll make a response to this episode. And judging by where we are now, Shovel Knight lost. And being the supposed self-entitled asshole that I am, I disagreed with Death Battle's reasoning. So for this video, I'll be going through the battle's conclusion and explaining the personal faults that I found in the justification. But before we get started, I need to make a few things clear. One is that I've never had any experience with DuckTales, Scrooge's comics, etc. Just because they were all before my time. DuckTales actually ended 9 years before I was born. But before people start saying that my arguments are invalid, I actually did my own research for this video, primarily in relation to fact-checking Scrooge's feats. Second is that while Shovel Knight is my preferred character between the two because of the fact that I've had experience with him, there have been plenty of Death Battles where my preferred character has lost and I agreed with the result. And lastly is that in the end, this is just my own opinion on who I think would win and my personal disagreements with Death Battle's justification. I'm not trying to force other people to agree with me. Just wait until the end of the video to make up your own opinion on the matter. Now, with that out of the way, let's get to it.
Shovel Knight might have been able to uphold the code of chivalry, but he could not hold up to Scrooge's wealth of experience and superior strength.
Aside from the extra 100+ years of experience he's got over Shovel Knight, Scrooge's feats blew him out of the water. For example, there's no way that Shovel could have put him down very quickly when he's powered through a minefield like it's nothing.
Or to nitpick here, more like 3 mines. I wouldn't exactly call that a minefield, since it would suggest that he went through dozens, or possibly hundreds of mines one after another. Now, admittedly, I couldn't find this comic anywhere in my research, so if there were other mines, feel free to let me know. And while I'm not arguing against Scrooge being able to survive a mine explosion, mainly due to cartoon logic, Shovel Knight has also been able to survive explosions. I mean, Plague Knight throws bombs all over the place, and Shovel Knight definitely takes them much better than a normal human would. Furthermore, Wiz and Boomstick just completely overlook the fact that Shovel Knight can survive being flung miles away by a catapult and immediately get back up. It is listed in Shovel Knight's analysis, but only in his background information when it should really be a feat. Wiz should have tried to calculate how much force this would have, which in turn would show how much force Shovel Knight could survive. Also, I don't get this part about Scrooge plowing through the mines like it was nothing, since he's covered in soot and appears to be in pain. And on the subject of durability, one thing I'm really surprised that Death Battle didn't do was try and determine how much force Scrooge could withstand from diving into his money bin, because, as Family Guy showed us, doing that would break every bone in your body. I couldn't find a way of measuring the force, but I do have a counter argument even to the money bin feat, being that a large part of Shovel Knight's arsenal is based in magic. Durability typically refers to how much physical force you can withstand, and Scrooge's case doesn't appear to be any different. However, magic can potentially bypass this since it isn't a physical force. It's a bit like Superman. He's insanely durable, but weak to magic. So while Scrooge could survive Shovel Knight's physical attacks, his magical abilities could get past this.
And remember how he threw a coin across the Potomac River and rode across fast enough to catch it? Well, we know the average width of the river is 1,300 feet, and he threw the coin at an angle of 20 degrees. After some quick calculations, this means he must have thrown the coin, boarded his boat, rowed across the entire river, and exited the boat to catch the coin in less than 5.4 seconds. This means he must have been rowing the boat at speeds well over 164 miles per hour.
But, you see, there is one issue with this feat.
Jesus, how fast are his arms moving there?
To make all that work, at least 14,400 rotations per minute.
The speed that Scrooge achieved was because of how fast his arms were rowing, meaning that it's not his running speed. If he became Jesus and ran across the river, then I wouldn't have any issue at this point, but the feat only boils down to how fast Scrooge can move his arms. The only time Scrooge needed to run was when getting in and out of the boat, and seeing as how he was right next to the boat, it's likely that this was just a short burst of speed rather than something Scrooge could maintain over time. You could argue that Scrooge's arms moving fast will allow him to surpass Shovel Knight in physical combat, but the majority of Scrooge's arsenal is projectile-based, so he's less likely to resort to close-range combat.
He is strong enough to rip apart a steamboat after all.
Okay, so Scrooge's steamboat feat. This is probably the piece of evidence I have the most issue with. When this was mentioned during Scrooge's analysis, I noticed one thing that Death Bell didn't seem to take into account, and it's exactly my issue with this feat being used to justify why Scrooge won. This feat occurred when Scrooge was much younger. Scrooge looks like he's about Donald's age, and in the caption, as the steamboat is being destroyed, it says accounts vary widely as to exactly what transpired that day in Dawson City, showing that it's a flashback. This means that this event took place when Scrooge was much younger, and in turn, much stronger than what he is now. I mean, the fact that it's a steamboat gives us an idea of the time period that this takes place. The steamboat was invented in 1787, and Scrooge was born in 1867. Then steamboats stopped being widely used by around the beginning of the 20th century, meaning that in a bit of a rough estimate, Scrooge would be, at most, 33 years old at this point in time, compared to his current age of 150. What would have been better to do was to find another ridiculous feat of strength performed by Scrooge, but during his older years, to show that he's still as strong as he was in the past, and then use that as the justification for using the steamboat feat. However, the only feat of strength I could find during Scrooge's older years was the arm wrestling clip used in the video, which is nowhere near as good as destroying a steamboat with your bare hands. The same applies to several of Scrooge's other feats, such as outrunning a cheetah and stopping a water buffalo, because those were during his younger years as well. So unless Scrooge can regenerate to give himself a younger body, I don't think we should be applying his younger feats without any proof that he can still do those things. What I find especially weird about this part is the fact that in Scrooge's analysis, they even mention his age as a weakness.
Seems pretty impressive, but Scrooge has some massively problematic flaws. Least of all is his age. He's 150 years old. That won't do him any favors in a fight.
But then completely ignore it later on and instead use it as a positive by saying that Scrooge has more experience, which I do agree with, but age does have its downsides. Granted, I'm not saying that Scrooge will be as weak as Mr. Burns, but his strength is likely much weaker than it was before. And while Shovel Knight's age is never stated, he appears to be around about a middle-aged man, which means he's still in his prime, so all of his feats can be applied, including Wiz's calculation that his striking power is over 4 times stronger than Mike Tyson's punches, which is Definitely stronger than anything Scrooge has done in his old age.
But regardless of Scrooge's power, Shovel Knight had very little options to defend against the Duck's wackier, physics-breaking weaponry. Those that could buy him some time could only last for so long due to his limited supply of magic.
Okay, so Scrooge's weaponry. At this part, I think Death Battle severely underplays the effectiveness of Shovel Knight's arsenal. Not only is Shovel Knight's arsenal larger and more diverse than Scrooge's, but he even has ways of getting around Scrooge's anti-inertia and anti-friction rays, which played a big part into how Scrooge won the battle itself. First up is one of my favorite relics from Shovel Knight, which for some reason didn't get used, being the Phase Locket. When using the Phase Locket, Shovel Knight becomes temporarily invincible, and enemies and projectiles just pass through him, so he could easily use this to avoid both rays. And second is that, does everybody seem to forget that Shovel Knight's Shovel Blade can reflect projectiles? Yes, even energy-based attacks like Black Knight's magic. This means that Shovel Knight could just reflect the anti-inertia and anti-friction rays back at Scrooge, in which he will be the one unable to move without slipping. And Shovel Knight's reflection ability doesn't use any magic, so it can be used indefinitely. Plus, on the subject of Scrooge's wacky weaponry, I have a few issues with that as well. Mainly being the cannon that Scrooge has in his mansion, because since it's a trap he has set up, he can only use it when in the mansion. I know that the battle takes place in McDuck Manor, but what if it was the other way around, and that the battle was in Shovel Knight's world, like the Plains of Passage or something? Scrooge wouldn't be able to use it, so I don't think it should be counted as part of his arsenal because it's only specific to one location. With Scrooge's other weapons, they wouldn't be able to do much to Shovel Knight due to his armor and durability. The only weapon Scrooge has that I can see being a problem is the Burglar Stunner, which also didn't get used, since it can pierce titanium, meaning that it could probably pierce Shovel Knight's armor. But like with the rays, Shovel Knight could just use the Phase Locket or reflect the beam back at Scrooge to avoid this. Now getting to Shovel Knight's magic being limited. I do agree with this, but I think Death Battle underplays how plentiful Shovel Knight's magic is, despite it being limited. Since Death Battle uses its characters at their maximum potential, I'm assuming they're using Shovel Knight's maximum magic, which is 100. But then there's the Ichor of Renewal, which heals all of Shovel Knight's health and magic. And since Shovel Knight can only hold 2 Ichor at a time, and because Death Battle also gave him the Ichor of Boldness, I'm guessing that Shovel Knight only has 1 Ichor of Renewal in the battle, meaning that his maximum magic is effectively 200. Therefore, this is how many times Shovel Knight could use his relics in the fight as long as he only used that one relic. Those are some pretty big numbers. This fight would have to go on for quite some time before Shovel Knight's magic completely runs out. Furthermore, Shovel Knight also has access to his other armors, which don't consume magic, including the Chaos Armor and Toad Armor, which gives Shovel Knight alternate fighting styles to throw Scrooge off. Plus, they gave special attention to the Dynamo Mail, which gives him that charged swing after 2 consecutive shovel drops. So if Shovel Knight's attacks hit 4 times harder than Mike Tyson, imagine how powerful that charged swing is.
Plus, Scrooge has fought knights and magicians before, while Shovel Knight never fought anyone quite like Scrooge McDuck.
Or again, to nitpick here, more like one knight. And that's just a regular knight, which Shovel Knight is anything but. Also, who are these magicians that Scrooge has fought? They're never mentioned at all in his analysis, so I had to look up magic users in the DuckTales universe to find out who they're referring to. First is the DuckTales villain Magica Dispel, who is a witch. When we're looking up her magical abilities, most of them appear to be very different to Shovel Knight's magic. Also, due to DuckTales being a comedic cartoon, a lot of the villains are freaking morons, so they're much less competent opponents. Meanwhile, all of Shovel Knight's opponents, like the Order of No Quarter, are much smarter, which makes his victories over them much more impressive. Because despite what Death Battle says, Shovel Knight is actually pretty smart. Getting off topic here, but another issue I have with this battle is that they claim that Shovel Knight is stupid for what is honestly a really dumb reason.
But even after all that, Shovel Knight doesn't seem the most intelligent warrior. After all, the only reason he gave up on Shield Knight for so long is because he just assumed she was dead.
He's stupid because he thought Shield Knight was dead. In real life, during police searches for missing people, if they haven't been found after a certain amount of time, they're presumed dead. That doesn't make the police stupid. It's just that they don't have any proof that they're still alive. Plus, out of all the characters in the game, Shovel Knight is the only person other than Black Knight to figure out that, spoiler alert, the Enchantress is actually Shield Knight possessed by the cursed amulet. And when some of the villains like Plague Knight and Tinker Knight are really smart, that's very impressive. But getting back to the DuckTales villains, I even found out that a lot of Magica's magic actually backfires on her, while Shovel Knight's obviously doesn't. The only other magic user I could find was Murloc, the villain of the DuckTales movie. But his only form of magic is using his talisman to transform into different animals, which means that it really just gives Scrooge experience over different types of animals rather than magic. Plus, Scrooge only won because he stole the talisman as Murloc was flying thousands of miles up in the air. Also, Shovel Knight never fought anybody like Scrooge? What about the Battletoads? I mean, they're also anthropomorphic animals who work on cartoony logic as they can transform their bodies into weapons. Plus, who is the villain of Battletoads? The Dark Queen, who is a master of magic! So Shovel Knight has experience against people who have fought magic users before. Now this takes me over to Shovel Knight defeating Kratos, because it plays a big role in why I think Shovel Knight beats Scrooge. Not only is Kratos far more powerful than any of the DuckTales villains, but listen to what Wiz says about Kratos when going over Shovel Knight's feats.
And he even held his own against the Battletoads and Kratos, the upcoming God of War.
The upcoming God of War. Now, based on Kratos' dialogue before the battle, it does appear that it takes place during the events of God of War 1, as Kratos is following Athena's orders. Even though he uses the Blades of Exile and the Nemean Cestus from God of War 3. But since we're applying the God of War canon to this battle, I think we should try and determine when exactly in God of War 1 does Shovel Knight's encounter with Kratos take place. Now, this is me spitballing a bit here, so feel free to tell me if I'm wrong, but in the battle, we see that Kratos can use Poseidon's Rage, the spell that Kratos receives at the beginning of God of War 1 on the ship. But then Kratos doesn't leave the ship at all during that point, meaning that at the very least, Kratos must have defeated the Hydra when he met Shovel Knight. But what's more important is the item that Kratos gives to Shovel Knight when you beat him. The Gravedigger's Shovel. This is a reference to the Gravedigger from God of War 1, who Kratos doesn't meet until fighting through Athens to meet the Oracle, in which Kratos pretty much ignores him at first. Then later on, after Kratos is impaled by a tree that Ares threw from thousands of miles away, the Gravedigger saves Kratos by digging a hole that leads out of the underworld, in which Kratos immediately goes out to fight Ares. Then after killing Ares, there are two transitions where an unspecified amount of time passes. One with Kratos kneeling in some kind of desert, and then another with Kratos talking to Athena on the ship. So as far as I'm aware, the only time Kratos could have taken the Gravedigger's shovel was after killing Ares. This would make the significance of Shovel Knight defeating him all the greater, considering that he would have defeated a guy who killed a god. And while Kratos does mention he's on a mission, which initially seems to be referring to enacting his revenge on Ares, he does have an alternative goal, which is for the gods of Olympus to erase his memories so he can forget killing his wife and daughter, which could be the goal Kratos is referring to here. Now, even if I'm wrong, which is possible, there is something that Death Battle overlooks here. God of War Ascension and Chains of Olympus. These are prequels to God of War 1, meaning that at the very least Kratos' feats from those games would apply to the battle against Shovel Knight. These include Kratos killing this thing, defeating the Titan Atlas, and killing Persephone, the queen of the underworld. And that's it for Death Battle's conclusion. My personal thoughts on the matchup are that while Scrooge has more experience and is potentially faster, his old age brings down his physical strength, and his weaponry can only delay the inevitable, as they can't do much to Shovel Knight. Meanwhile, Shovel Knight's strength and durability could easily keep him going, as well as being able to reflect Scrooge's projectiles back at him, along with avoiding or withstanding them with the Phase Locket or Ichor of Boldness, respectively. Plus, his arsenal easily trumps Scrooge's in both numbers and diversity, which he can keep going thanks to his large supply of magic, which could also bypass Scrooge's durability. And lastly, his achievements defeating the Battletoads and Kratos are far greater compared to the characters that Scrooge has beaten. So in my opinion, I think Shovel Knight should have won this battle. But of course, it is all just what I think, and if you agree with Death Battle, then that's totally okay. I just hope that the next Death Battle has a much better connection between the two characters. Venom vs. Bane. What the fuck? But with that, I'll see you guys for my next response video, and if you remember the recurring trend that seems to occur every time I respond to Death Battle, then you'll already have an idea of what to expect.